All right. So I've got 44 of these slides, and we've got about an hour and I think an hour and a half maybe. So not going to spend a whole lot of time going into too much detail, but the ones that I think you really need to know some things about, I'll spend a little bit of time on those, and then I want to allow time for any questions. And hopefully a lot of these reports you've already looked at or know where to find them. That's kind of the big mystery within PIC, is knowing where to find some of these reports, because they are hidden in a few different places. Okay, so PIC reports to use. Which PIC reports do you need to use to help you stay above the 95% occupancy rate? And occupancy is a big deal. That is something that HUD is monitoring. And, we want to try to keep our, public housing occupancy at least 96% or higher. Okay, so the overlapping date reports is the first one, or is one of them, I should say. And I'll go into more detail about these individual reports, but I just want to show you which reports you should be looking at. The portability billing report, if you have a Section 8 program, the portability billing report is important to look at. The delinquency report, the reexamination report. The delinquency and the reexamination are probably the biggies. The CMAP indicators, which is for our Section 8 only PHAs. The duplicate tenant report, possible duplicate tenant report. The invalid tenant ID report. This can save you a lot of grief if you monitor this report. This is where a lot of the Social Security number issues come in. The 50058 ad hoc report. This is an interesting report if you want to run some demographic information about your housing authority. And the HA query report is another important one that you would use to look up a tenant by social to see if they live somewhere else besides your housing authority, if their Social Security number comes up somewhere else. This is one report that you can use. Okay, so best practices for PIC as far as reports. For the Housing Choice Voucher Program, we recommend that you review these particular reports on a monthly basis. The CMAP indicators, the overlapping date report, the portability billing, and the delinquency. And for public housing programs, we recommend the re-exam report, the occupancy aging report, the unit status summary report, and the delinquency report. And for all programs, review the 50058 submission tickets, immediately after you submit a 5.8. If you get a submission ticket, fatal error, that is something that needs to be addressed right away, because often they do not fix themselves. You have to fix them. So that's something to keep in mind. And what I have here is a screenshot of some of the locations for some of these reports. As I said, some of them are hidden within PIC. Some of them are quite obvious under the sections that say report. That is, kind of a, there's a report there, but then there's some that are buried within some of the modules. So the occupancy aging report is one that is hidden. Well, I shouldn't say it's hidden. It's located within the development submodule within PIC. I mean, the development submodule, if you have a public housing program, shows you your buildings and units information, but within there is a report tab, and that report tab lists reports that you can look at for your buildings and your units. The unit report and the occupancy aging report are very important, and those reports should be looked at least monthly, because what happens is sometimes you'll get a message from HUD saying you've got vacant units, and you come back and say, well, those units are rented. I know I've got people in those units, and you probably do have people in those units, but for some reason they're not showing up in PIC. And so if you look at the unit report or you look at the occupancy aging report, it will tell you who's living in those units. And it'll tell you if those units are indeed vacant. So these are two important reports that you need to look at monthly, because sometimes you may process a 50058 and you think that you did an end of participation, or you may have, processed a move-in, a new admission. And for some reason that 50058 didn't take. There was some type of an error where it didn't process. And you think you've leased up that unit or vacated that unit. So it's good to look at these reports monthly just to make sure that the number of tenants, that the correct tenant is residing in the correct unit. Okay. All right. The PIC monthly summarization reports. And these are the reports that are updated monthly from our Washington office. And these reports you really should be looking at every month, because this will give you a lot of information about your tenants, the ones that are due for reexaminations, if you've got delinquent 50058s. And the reexamination report and the delinquency report really, they really talk to each other. If you've got delinquent reexaminations, then that delinquency report is going to reflect those reexaminations in your reporting rate for 50058s. But the PIC monthly reports, sometimes you'll get an email from our office stating that the monthly summarization report did not run, or it encountered an error, and they have to, hold the 50058s in queue, and they'll have to process them at a later date. Well, what happens is at the end of every month, and we're in the month of September. So September 30th will be the cutoff date for any 50058s to process. If you're doing new admissions, if you're doing reexaminations, change of units, any type of 58 transactions, you have until the end of that current month to get those items processed into PIC. Well, come October 1st, or the first weekend of the following month, and when I say weekend, it's the first Friday of the following month. So in this particular example, it would be October, and the first Friday in October, the summarization report is going to run. And what it's going to do is it's going to look at all the 50058s that have been processed for the month of September. So that report is normally available the following Monday after that Friday when it processes, if there were no errors. If there was errors, then you get that email from us saying that the reports encountered an error when they tried to run the updates, and they usually have to rerun those again. But if everything processes normally, the data is available that Monday. But the data is available, the PIC summarization reports are always the previous month's data. It's not for the current month that the report generates. So for October, it's always going to reflect September's data. That's why you had until September 30th to process everything. So the reports will show anything as of September 30th. So if you processed 50058s on October 1st, and you're thinking, it should have shown up on the report, you did a new admission or a reexamination or whatever, it's just not going to show until the following month. But these reports are very important to look at because, as I said, it looks at the reexams that are due, that are going to become delinquent, and the delinquency report also. And then for the Section 8 program, the CMAP indicators report is also updated. And so these three, I circled these three reports because these are the most important ones to look at. So I'll get into more detail about those indicator reports or the summarization reports when I go further along into the presentation. So the first report, when I told you about which reports you need to look at as far as, trying to stay above the 95%, I talked about the overlapping date report. And the overlapping date report is a report that will show you if a tenant has leased up at another housing authority. And I know you've all probably had that experience where you've had a tenant that will go and look for housing elsewhere, go ahead and lease up with that housing authority, and may forget to tell you that they've done that. And what happens is the receiving or the new housing authority that's going to move them in leases them up. They should be doing their checks. They should be looking into PIC, and they should be looking into EIV to see if that tenant is leased up somewhere else. They should be looking at the EIV report or existing tenant to see if that tenant does live somewhere else. But sometimes they don't do that. So that's why this report is very important to look at, because it will tell you that you have a tenant that's possibly going to be moving somewhere else, and PIC is going to do something for you that will make it very hard for you to correct if you don't get a heads up on this. So this is a screenshot of the overlapping date report, or where you can find the overlapping date report. It's in the 50058 viewer section. There's a tab over on the far end that says reports, and you would click on that and it will give you a number of reports that are available, and the overlapping date report is one of them. And this is a screenshot of what the overlapping date report looks like. There are 3 tabs for this report. There's 3 tabs across the top, and it defaults to the first tab. And the first tab shows you the automatic EOPs and port outs that are pending. And so if you have a tenant that is, like I say, leased up at another housing authority, they for some reason haven't communicated that information to you, and if PIC has not gone in and done the move out for you, because PIC will do that. If PIC sees that that tenant is still leased at your housing authority and they've leased up with the new housing authority, it gives you just a small window of opportunity to do some things in the system. And on the first, just say for instance, on the 20th of the month, that tenant decides to lease up with another housing authority, and that housing authority puts them in as a new admission, or they do, like say port. Well, if it's a port out or an automatic EOP, it usually will show up here, or it should show up here, but the tenant should be communicating that information to you. But there's something that the housing authority has done in the system that will cause the system to recognize that that tenant is leased up in 2 different locations. So what happens is on the first of the month, the system looks and sees that there's a tenant in 2 locations. And PIC is saying, well, we can't have that. We can't have a tenant in 2 different housing authorities. So it's going to do an end of participation for the housing authority that the tenant is leaving and move them into the new housing authority. And sometimes you don't see this, or you don't know this until you see an end of participation that's dated for the first of the month. Sometimes end of participations can be, whatever date, different dates, but the automatic EOP will just automatically do it on the first of the following month, if the housing authority hasn't gone in to process an end of participation for the tenant that is leaving, if they haven't done that end of participation and that new admission is sitting out there. So I don't know if any of you have encountered this. This is something that does happen. It's best to look at this report, because it will alert you if something like this is about to happen. And as I said, there are 3 different tabs for it. There's, the automatic EOP and the port outs pending. You have new admissions, port ins causing an overlapping date issue. And then there's a tab that says automatic EOPs and port outs that have already processed. Once it hits the third tab, once they have already processed, you can't do anything about it. That's when PIC it's gone past that first, it's hit that first of the month threshold, and that tenant has been automatically moved out of the system. And so just so you don't have any surprises, if you just take a look at this report, if you don't have any data on there, then you don't have anything to worry about. But some housing authorities, especially some of the larger ones, this tends to be a problem for them. Smaller ones, maybe not so much. But occasionally it will catch you off guard. Okay, and these are just, like I said, the different screens in that report for the overlapping date. Okay, the portability billing report is one that you just want to make sure, if you are a Section 8 housing authority and you have a billing situation where either you're billing or being billed, you want to take a look at this report to make sure that the information is correct, that you are, if you're billing, if you are, if the correct housing authority is reflected, or if you are being billed, that information is showing. And what it shows is if when the 50058 is submitted for a portability move out, and that line 12D, it requires lines 12D through F to be completed, and you want to just make sure that information is completed correctly when that 5.8 is processed. But again, looking at this report will let you know if there's something that you don't see or something that you do see that you're not aware of, that this is a way that you can identify that and make any corrections you need. And this is an example of that portability billing. It will show which housing authority is billing, the cost that they're being billed, and the effective date of the action. And there's two tabs, again, one that shows billing and one that shows billed. Okay, the delinquency report. This is one that is very important to be looking at, because like I say, the delinquency report and the reexamination report come out monthly with that monthly summarization report. And this report shows you if you've got delinquent 5/8s. And the delinquent 5/8s, this report it's tied to the reexamination report. And so if you've got delinquent re-exams, it's going to be reflected in this delinquency report as far as your reporting rate, as far as how you're processing your 50058s. And so for public housing, what it will show you is, the 5/8s that have been, it'll show you 5/8s that have been received, and it will show you which ones, it'll tell you how many are due. It won't tell you which ones are due, but it will tell you how many are due that are delinquent. And anything that's past, that turns 14 months or older as far as a 5/8, mainly your reexaminations, or if you haven't done anything if it was a new admission and you haven't processed a 50058 since a new admission and it's been 14 months or more, it's going to be reflected in this delinquency report. And it's also going to be reflected on the reexamination report. For the Housing Choice Voucher Program, data is pulled from the VMS system, and VMS is typically a month behind the monthly summarization reports because of the way that the VMS data is reported in that system. So those numbers a lot of times will not be reflective of what's currently going on with your voucher program. So sometimes it's a little difficult to figure the Section 8 part out, but just know that the data that's pulled into that delinquency report is pulled from VMS, and VMS is always a little bit, it's a month behind the summarization report. And hopefully you guys are looking at this report. I know that the portfolio managers from the offices are sending out notices to housing authorities that may have, you know, if your delinquencies are, you know, if your reporting rate is low, or if you've got a lot of late re-exams, then it's going to show. And they are sending out notices to alert you of that, so you can start looking to see what's going on with your tenants. And this is, like I say, an example of that delinquency report. It shows the number of 50058s received, and then it will tell you, you know, how many. It'll give you your reporting rate, and it'll also tell you how many 5/8s that you are due to have processed. Okay, the reexamination report. The reexamination report, like I say, it will show you your tenants. It will actually give you a list of your tenants. It'll give you a list of all of your tenants in your household, and it ranks them by the most by the most delinquent up to the most current. It shows every household that's due for a reexam, but it also will show you, starting with the first one, the ones that are most delinquent. And like I say, at the 14-month or more delinquencies are reflected in your delinquency report, and those start counting against you. And so this is what that report looks like. It will give you that household, head of household's name. It'll tell you the last date that an annual reexamination was done. And it will tell you how many months since it was done. And this report really surprises a lot of people because they think that they've processed their reexams, and for some reason that household is still showing up on this report. So this will, and more than likely it was some type of a PIC error that caused the delinquency. So this is one that you really want to look at. You should be looking at to make sure your reexams have processed and make sure you don't have any late households. But with the COVID-19, I will say with the COVID-19 waiver that's in place up until December 31st, I believe, there's been an extension on processing reexaminations, but for housing authorities that can get those processed, we're asking that you please do that. But there is a moratorium in place, or I should say a waiver in place that gives you until December 31st to get those in. Okay, the CMAP indicators report, as this is again for how housing authorities that have the Section 8 program. This report, you know, if you look at the indicators 9 through 12, just to see what those numbers are showing, and, you know, make sure that those numbers are reflecting your housing authorities, you know, CMAP information correctly. This is really just a report to look at to make sure that you're, you know, that the numbers are reflecting correctly, and if there's any issues, then it really is not a big deal until you get to your CMAP fiscal year end is when it's really critical. But in the interim, you can just look at this report and just, you know, make sure, like I say, that things are trending in the right direction or the numbers are looking good. And this is, again, this is an example of the CMAP indicators report. Okay, the tenant ID management. This is one that I think is very critical, especially when you encounter Social Security number issues. And a lot of times you don't get these Social Security number issues until it's time for a reexamination or sometimes an interim. Because when you move a tenant in, you can sometimes get them in if there's an issue with that Social Security number. Sometimes it'll flag it right up front if Social Security's records have been updated. But if Social Security is in a period of where they have not updated their data, sometimes you can get that tenant moved in, and that if that Social Security number has a, if it's a last name issue, if it's a date of birth, or even if it's a transposition of one of the numbers, you can somehow move that tenant in because Social Security's database hasn't flagged it. And you don't find this out and that there's an issue until it's time for re-exam. Well, the tenant ID management module is where you want to go to fix your Social Security number issues. But this only works in certain instances. And the tenant ID management report plays a big factor into this. So if you have a tenant that's got an invalid Social Security number you discover during re-examination time, you try to process their re-exam 5-8 and it comes back saying Social Security number doesn't match Social Security's records because it could be an invalid date of birth, last name, whatever the error message says. Well, the first thing you want to do is you want to look at the tenant ID management report, because if that head of household is flagged on this tenant ID management report, then you can fix the Social Security number in the tenant ID module. But if they are not on that report, for some reason, we've had issues where, we know there's households that, the head of household has an invalid Social Security number, but for some reason the report doesn't flag it. Well, the only way that you can fix it in that instance is we have to start voiding 5-8s, and hopefully it's just one 5-8 that's in the system and it's for that new admission. And, we can avoid that new admission 5-8 and just kind of start over. And some of you I've worked with on this issue before, but this is one that tends to stump a lot of people because you try different things. You try to fix it in tenant ID management and it still won't fix it. Well, tenant ID management will not fix it if that head of household does not show up on the invalid tenant ID report. It just won't fix it at all. If they show up on there, and you might, and as I said, this is a report you want to be looking at because you may have some households that show up on here that you didn't know that there was an invalid tenant ID. And like I say, a lot of times you don't discover it until it's time for re-examination. So you want to be looking at this and making sure that you're staying ahead of the game. And, in case this does, rear its ugly head during re-examination time, you've already got it fixed. But this tenant ID management, I want to say, only works for head of households. It does not work for household members. Household members, invalid Social Security numbers or whatever, those can be corrected by just doing an interim re-examination with a correction. Or if it's annual re-examination time, you can fix it with an annual re-exam and just putting in the correct Social Security number at that point. But that's only for household members, not head of households. Okay. And this is the possible duplicate tenant report. It's in that same tenant ID management module. The possible duplicate tenant report also is something that you want to look at because sometimes it flags a household member that maybe has the same birthday as a tenant in another housing authority that lives in another part of the country. And it's really something that you should just be looking at to make sure that everything is okay. And if there is a way to go in and tell the system, hey, this is, it is a possible duplicate tenant, but the data that we have is correct. This is not someone living in 2 different locations. And this is one that I would ask, if you ever run into this issue, reach out to your PIC coach, reach out to me, and I'll walk you through how to correct the information on here. but it'll stay on here until you fix it. And here's one with the invalid tenant ID, just an example of what that report will look like. And a lot of times it will tell you why it's an invalid tenant ID. It's last name, it could be date of birth, it could be a number of things. Okay, the 50058 and ad hoc module. Okay, the 50058 ad hoc report. Sometimes housing authorities want to run, it's more of like a query report of PIC. It's a query of your household, of your tenants. And you can run a different information about you know, your household, your tenants that are living there. You can run household information as far as how many females are living there, how many males are living there, how many, you know, by disability, by, you can, if you're really sophisticated, you could do it by age, racial component. There's just all different kinds of things that you could run the report on. And it's based on all of the fields that are within the 50058. So this is something that I just wanted to point out to housing authorities that is available to them if they ever wanted to run a report to get, you know, certain types of information that you just might want to look at. It's really, it's not a required report. It's just more of, if you want to get in there and play around with it, you can do that. Also within the 50058 module is the query for where you can look up your tenants. And a lot of times, if I've spoken to any of you and you call me about an error or email me about an error, the first thing I ask you is, have you looked the tenant up in PIC? Have you looked in the 50058 query to see if that tenant, first of all, if that tenant lives there, and what is the most recent 50058 in the system for that tenant? Well, the 50058 query will give you that information. You can query a tenant by first or last name or by social security number. It defaults, there's, when the screen comes up, let me see if I have that screen. Yes, I do. Okay, so when you put the tenant's information in, it defaults to the current database, which that means it's going to give you the most current 50058s that's in the system for that tenant. There is a way to look at historical 58s for that tenant. If you click on the historical database radio button over to the left, but it defaults to the current. And so what this system tells you is, this is the most recent 50058 that we are showing in the system for this tenant. It'll give you the date that the 50058 was processed, and you can click and view that 50058, and it'll show you everything that was entered. If it was a new admission, a reexamination, whatever, it's going to give you that information. And this is a good way, a lot of times, when you process a 5A, just say you have a new admission or an interparticipation or even a reexamination, and you're wondering if it processed. You know, you're wondering if it shows up in PIC. Well, once you upload a 5A, which uploading 5.8 is real time in PIC, it will process that 5.8 into the system, and you should be able to view that 5.8 as soon as it's uploaded. Well, you can go to viewer, this 50058 viewer, you can put in that tenant's either their social or their first and last name, and you'll be able to pull up that 5.8. And then that lets you know, number one, that 5.8 did process, and that you know, everything was successful. And there's another way also, when I talked about the unit reports, when we were talking about the development submodule, where you can look at the unit reports or the occupancy aging. If a tenant, if the 508 processed correctly, they're going to show up on that report. Or you can just look at your units, your list of units in the development module. for public housing housing authorities. If you just look at the list of your units, you can see which tenants are living there. And if the unit is showing vacant and you say, well, I know I just processed a new admission 5-8, well, then something probably happened that tenant didn't get moved in. So these are good checks and balances for yourself to make sure that your stuff is processing correctly and that you've got the right information in the system. Okay, and this is an example of the screen after you put the tenants, either their social in or their first and last name. This is the screen that will come up. And as I said, you can see the update date is the date that 5-8 was entered into the system. And if you want to click on view under entire 50058, that's where you would view that 5-8 to see, to see that it did process. And the ad hoc report that I was mentioning earlier, this is, like I say, where you could run, if you wanted families that are receiving vouchers or, just any type of information that you want to look at. If you want all your public housing tenants, you can select whichever section here you want. And then once you click the continue button, then it goes through and gives you a set of fields, and it's normally the fields that show up on the 50058, and you can start building a report from there. The HA query report. This is a good tool to use if you have a tenant that may possibly be living somewhere else, or you're trying to lease them up and you run into an error message saying, this tenant already exists in PIC, they're not existing at your housing authority. Well, you can go here to the HA query, and this is under the 50058 module, and you can put in that tenant's social security number. And if they are living at another housing authority, it's going to tell you, it'll show you the housing authority, and it could be any housing authority across the country. It'll tell you which housing authority, and it'll tell you what the latest 5-8 in the system is for that tenant. So this is a really good tool, especially, like I say, when you get that error message that said this tenant is already an IMS PIC, you'll have to process either ender participation or something like that. I forget what the error says. But you could go here and put that number in just to see if they do show up. Okay, so that's the end of the PIC reports, and there's a lot of those. So hopefully a lot of you have used those reports, and if you had not heard of them, hopefully I explained enough to you to where you know where to find them and know how to use them. Okay, so the EIV reports, and before I get to EIV, there was an email that was sent out probably towards the end of August about PIC training that's going to be held by our Washington office. That PIC training is going to be September 29th or the 30th, I believe. I'm hoping that a lot of you signed up for that training. It's probably going to be a little bit more detailed than what we can cover here today. I don't have very much information about what they're going to cover, but hopefully they will cover a little bit more detailed information. I do know that they did have an EIV training that was last month. I don't know if any of you got a chance to attend that training. I heard there was a few stumbling blocks getting started with it, but if any of you did attend it, hopefully it was good. And I think there's a second session also, and I can't remember what date that is. Okay, so the EIV reports, and there's a few of these that you need to be looking at on a monthly or quarterly basis. And mainly these reports are, when you do your reexaminations and when you do your new admissions, these are some reports that you need to be looking at. And I'm thinking a lot of you already know this, but just a reminder that for the monthly EIV monitoring, you need to be looking at your deceased tenants report, the identity verification report, and the immigration report, and the income validation tool. And the income validation tool is a new, it's new, but it's not, it's newer than a lot of these other reports. And I know there's been some issues with the income validation tool, but it's one that you really should be looking at. And I know there's been people that have encountered some issues with getting that tool to come up. It happens for us also as HUD employees. Sometimes the system is up and down. Sometimes there's a browser issue. So I think they tried to work a lot of the kinks out of that, you know, accessing that tool. But if you're having any issues, just reach out to the HUD office, and we probably would have to refer you to the EIV office for help with that, because that is it's a systems issue. Okay, for monitoring quarterly, we're asking you to look at the monthly subsidy report and the new hires report. Okay, the income validation tool, wanted to talk just a little bit about that since it's a fairly newer report. And we're still learning a lot of things about this tool. It does provide some really, really good information. It shows you based on the 50058 that's been uploaded to PIC for a household and during their last reexamination. It's going to show you whether or not there's any discrepancies with the income that was reported in that 5.8. And right here is where it's showing you how to access the tool, just the links to get to it. And then once you pull up the tool, you'll select your PHA code. From your perspective, I see all of the PHA codes, so I'm not sure for you. I think you just probably see your own. But once your PHA code populates, or you can start typing it, I think, and it pulls it up. And once you pull, you click Get Report. And then this is the screen that comes up. And there's a lot of information. And you can look at it. This report can be filtered by, you know, if you've got Section 8 and public housing, you can look at either one of those programs, or you can look at them both combined together. But what it's going to do is it's going to flag household members, or households, I should say, that have discrepancies with what was reported on their 50058. And it tells you the different categories that the income information is coming from. It tells you what was reported on the 5.8, and then it's telling you what was pulled or what information was gathered from the Social Security and national database, the national database of new hires, any unemployment income that was received. It's going to tell you all of that. And as far as even, you know, it drills down into where a person was working, if it has that information. So it's a really good detailed report. You can set threshold limits as far as for unreported income. This screen right here is showing anything greater than or equal to $2,400 as far as a discrepant income. But you can change that to a 0, or you can set it wherever you want, and it will show you the information. Okay, and this is an example of a household member that it's showing income that was reported on the 50058, is showing what was reported from the Social Security and new hires database, and it shows you the total amount of the unreported income, which is quite a bit. So $50,000 is a lot of money to be unreported. So this is a real red flag. And I know this is just an example, but we've had some situations where there have been enormous amounts of income that is shown that to be unreported. One of the things that, and this shows you wage income, and this is what I want to talk about. I had a situation with one of our larger housing authorities that had a household member show up on this report. She was 82 years old, and she showed up as having a job in Texas somewhere. The employer was, it could have been their payroll office was out of Texas, not necessarily that the company was in Texas, but it showed that she had, like $50,000 or more of unreported income for several months. And the housing authority knew this lady. They knew she couldn't possibly be working. So we're thinking it may have been a possible stolen Social Security information, that her information was stolen. So it's really good to look at this, this report, because even though a household could show up on here as having discrepant income, it could be it could be a bigger underlying issue that the household member may not even know about. So this is really good. But this is something, once it shows up on this report, you should be having a conversation with that household member to see what's exactly going on, because it could be an issue where this is erroneous information. And unfortunately, it's got to get corrected some kind of way, but it alerts that household member of this information. And, like I say, it reports Social Security, new hires if you are working somewhere, and it also reports unemployment benefits if you received unemployment. Okay, I think I got through everything. Do we have any questions?
So Donna, this is Mark Anderson from Lindsborg.
Hi, Mark.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great. I was looking at some of the reports earlier when you were going through the PIC reports,
Mm-hmm.
and I was showing a resident who ended participation back in February 2020.
Mm-hmm.
I went back into our software and looked and double checked dates, and in our software, she has an end of participation in
Right.
February, but I still saw her name at the top of the report list, having 15 months to her last recertification,
Right.
and she should be there.
And Mark, that is not unusual. That's a very common occurrence. I'm not sure exactly what happened between your software communicating with PIC to upload that information. I know, and I mentioned earlier, that sometimes the monthly summarization reports encounter an error. And what they'll do is they'll hold 50058s in queue until they can get those processed. Sometimes that will cause an issue with 5/8s. Not a lot of times, but every now and then there may be a few that slip by that don't process. So the way to fix this, she was in end of participation?
Yes.
Okay. So the easiest way to fix this, since she's already out of your software, you can go into PIC, go to the 50058 viewer, put in her first and last name or put in her social.
Yes.
Once that screen comes up that shows, and let me see if I don't know if I can back into that screen, but there's the screen that shows up that shows, the date the 5/8 was processed. Now there should be a link for online EOP.
Yes.
Just go ahead and push that online EOP button or link, and that'll take care of her.
And then and I can change the date to the date she ended participation and then submit it, save it.
Yes. Yep.
All right, I just did that.
Yeah. And I'm glad you had that situation as an example, because that has happened to a lot of housing authorities, and we don't want you to go back and put the person in your software and, you know, do a whole bunch of data entry. So the best method, especially if it was an online EOP, or an EOP, is just do that online EOP function and you're good to go.
One of my concerns about that is because I already put somebody in that apartment, you know.
Yeah. And see, that's another two swatches for you on your hand for that. But you should make sure that unit is vacant before you move someone in. And these are just the little tricks and checks that I try to tell people to do to make sure, you know, when you move someone out, go into viewer and check and make sure they did move out. Just go and go to viewer, or go look at that unit and see if that unit is vacant. Either when you're moving someone in or when you move them out. That's just to make sure you don't run into any problems.
Okay. Well, I've had that error in the past, and then it's warned me and it said that unit's not vacant yet.
Yeah.
It says, since I don't recall that happened.
The most important paper?
So I was unaware that there was any kind of a conflict until I saw her name still on the list.
Right. Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why we encourage, you know, housing authorities to look at that re-exam report, because those household members aren't going anywhere until something's done. They will stay on there forever.
Okay.
Okay. No problem. Is there any other questions?
You remember, Savannah, I don't want to occupy all your time, but
Oh, you're fine.
you and I corresponded via email, and one of our community building wasn't showing up in PIC.
Yes.
And when I look now, it still doesn't show up in PIC.
Okay. Now, this isn't the one that you're trying to do the demo on.
No.
That's a different situation. Okay.
Yes, that's a different situation.
Okay. So let me tell you, if you have a community building, does the building have electricity?
Yes.
Okay. So I'll have to send you a form. There's a form that you need to fill out to get the building added to the system. Once I get that form back from you, I will forward it on to a power user that can go ahead and add that building in the system for you.
Okay. Well, it's kind of interesting because the building was built in 1972, so it's kind
of, yeah, that, I mean, we've got a lot of housing authorities that are finding that out too, that they've got buildings that are not showing up for whatever reason.
Okay.
You're not the only one.
All right. Thank you.
No problem. Is there any other questions from anyone else?
It's me again, Savannah. I gave somebody else a chance and they didn't say anything. So
that's right.
The reports that I was seeing you display on the screen here for EIV, the colors and the fields on the screen, I'm not seeing that in my.
Okay, so let me try to go back. Let's see here. Okay, so do you see this screen when you get into EIV?
Yes.
Okay, so this is where the reports are. The other screens I had were just little fancy screens. Colors, you mean like this one here?
Right.
Okay, yeah, no, those are just slide
but if
pictures, yeah.
I look under user administration, for example, on the reports, that previous slide that you were showing there. And you see where yours says user administration by role.
Yes. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
And then yours says PHA access.
Yes.
I don't see that.
And you probably won't because I have a different level of access in EIV. So that is a report that we use internally. It tells
Okay.
us which PHAs are accessing EIV.
But should my screen be the same? If you could pull up one of those that was showing income for the 2 or 3 different tenants in that apartment.
It was an EIV report.
Yeah, an EIV report.
Let's see here. What is it? Was it under the income validation tool? Hold on.
That one.
Yes.
I do not see that anywhere in my.
That's the income validation tool. Do you have a link for the income validation tool?
I see income information by head of household, by reexamination month, by new hires.
The income it should be under verification reports.
Okay, there. Okay, income validation tool. Okay.
Yep. So click on that, and it should, once you put in your PHA code and click on Get Report, then this is what the screen will look like when it comes up.
Okay, now I'm seeing the same thing. All right.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
And sometimes this report, depending on how it's feeling from day to day, that's how I look at it. Sometimes it won't come up.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's a browser issue. Sometimes you have to pull it up in Google Chrome. Sometimes you have to pull it up in Microsoft Edge. Sometimes it won't even come up in Internet Explorer. So it just has a mind of its own sometimes.
Okay, cool. Well, now it's showing, so I'm
okay, good. And are you showing tenants on there?
I am showing 3 tenants.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So should I be seeing all of them? Or?
No, it's only going to display tenants that have discrepant income. And it's tenants that, based on their 50058 income information, the income validation tool is saying, hey, this is where I'm finding a discrepancy.
Okay.
And it'll show you what source is generating that discrepancy, if it's Social Security or new hires, or if it's unemployment income.
Okay. I will peruse this, and then I'll maybe have to give you a call or send you an email.
That's fine.
Thank you.
No problem. Anyone else? I don't want to call on anybody.
So, this is Roxanne in Atchison.
Sure. Hi, Roxanne.
I have a question about, I have a couple of families that their 5/8 is in the PIC system, but when I go into EIV and I'm trying to run their income by head of household, it says that there's nothing in the system.
How long have they been living there?
One for over a year, and he used to show up on our, he shows up on the viewer and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And the others, they've all been there quite a while, so it's not anything like where their ID's hanging out there.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't know with that, Roxanne. Sometimes those EIV reports might encounter some issues. And you said he had shown up before?
Yes, yes, we ran as EID in the past on one that I know of for sure, and the other. I'm sorry, I just put my stuff away. But yeah, none of them are new tenants. These are all
Okay.
long-term existing tenants.
But you're not having issues with any of your other tenants showing up, are you?
No, no. I just ran a bunch of move-in EID reports, and everything was fine until I got to it was just a few files.
Okay, well, you know, sometimes, like I say, sometimes the EIV database can have some issues. What I would tell you is if you try to run them again and you keep running into the problem, send an email along with the description of the problem to the EIV_help@HUD.gov. Send an email to them, and like I say, with the description of the problem, and let them know, and they'll troubleshoot and try to see what's going on with it.
Okay, yeah, it was kind of strange. I had the same problem last month, but it was just one file, and it was somebody different than where I'm having problems today. So I don't know.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
Yeah,
It very well could be a system issue, and you know, it's with those, it's just really hard to pinpoint.
Okay, I'll get a hold of them if I keep having it. Thank you so much.
Okay, no problem.
Savannah,
NH?
Yes.
what does the acronym NDNH stand for?
National, New Hires Database. What is it? National Database for New Hires.
New
Yes.
hires, okay.
Yes.
And so I'm seeing a discrepancy here of about $6,000 between what I've reported and what Social Security Administration.
Now and one of the things I forgot to mention, you can drill down if you click on, because you can drill down and it'll tell you where that income is coming from. It'll tell you the company that the person is working for.
By clicking on the social?
I believe it's the social, yes. I can't demonstrate it because of PII, but I believe if you do click on the Social Security number.
I did that. And then under income amount, there are a couple of cells in the far right-hand column that says income amount that are highlighted in red.
Okay.
Do you know why those would be highlighted in red? Because that's the discrepancy? Or?
It could be. I don't know right off the top of my head. But is that where, does it look like it's adding up to the $6,000?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, that's probably what it is. It's flagging that.
No.
I've had a lot of problems with this individual because she doesn't work.
Okay.
She tell me she's working, and you know.
Right. Well, this is a good way to catch that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Like I said, I'll have to maybe shoot you a screenshot or two and have you help me.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Was there another question? It sounded like someone else had a question.
Rebecca would like you to put the contact info screen back up.
Oh, that had,
if you have that.
For me?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. That has my little beach picture, or there we go. And you guys, you can contact me, you know, shoot me an email. We're still not physically working in our offices, but email, and we do check our voicemails, but you know, email gets to me the quickest. So if you send me an email, I will respond, and, sometimes I don't have the answer right away, but I'll add you to my list of, issues that are making me pull my hair out and trying to figure out. So sometimes it takes a little investigation to figure these issues out. Well, I don't know. If no one else has any questions, then I guess we can try to wrap this up.
So much for inspiration.
Okay. Well, thank you, Savannah. That was awesome. We definitely appreciate you coming and speaking with us today.
Thank you.
I am going to steal your share screen
Okay.
and throw up the game code for those of you who are playing the game. Make sure you take this down and enter it in to receive your points.
I know we were all skeptic about going virtual and all that jazz.
Is it working? I can. Oh, there it goes.
There it goes.
Are you trying to talk? Sorry.
I'll leave that up for a few seconds here. All right. One last chance for anybody to ask Savannah.
You know what? I see
a
a lot of chats. I didn't see the group chat because I still had my presentation up, so I didn't see the group chat questions. Some of them I think were answered.
Yep, I've been reading through them.
Okay.
Again with the code. The code is TWO200, right, Rebecca? TWO200. I'll put it in the chat. That's the code right there. The only one that found kind of funny.
I'm looking at the ones about the 2-day or the training. Yeah, well,
for the semester.
No, I will say PIC is really, it takes months, if not years, to understand it. I mean, it's just really a system that is full of hidden information, and trying to learn it, and it's a lot. It's a lot. So don't feel bad if there's a lot of things you don't know about PIC. I am still learning some things about PIC that I didn't know were there. And it's just one of those systems. It was created quite a few years ago. It's probably not the most user-friendly as far as navigating the screens. But once you kind of figure out where everything is, then you can, you know where to go. But sometimes if you don't use those screens a lot, you'll forget where stuff is. So don't feel bad. Yes, it is a system that takes a lot to learn.
All right, everybody. Any more questions? Mark, you look like you're in serious deep thought over there.
I'm going to agree with the previous person that it takes a lot of years to get to know this, and I'm always finding out something new when I'm in here.
Oh, yeah.
So I need to have just like an emergency number with Savannah's name on it. I just put
No, I always tell the housing authorities, especially when I do these trainings, that I think you guys call each other up one day out of the month and just say, hey, let's all call Savannah at the same time or the same day and inundate her with a bunch of problems that we're having. So, because there'll be some days I don't hear from anybody. And then it's usually the days where I have a lot to do. And then here I start getting a whole bunch of emails or phone calls, but it's all good. That's what I'm here for, to help you. So you're not bugging me at all.
You have a question over here in the chat.
Okay.
If I correct a date of birth, should I do so from the MI 08 and redo all other 08s, or can I do so with an interim?
Okay, so that was Catherine Linder. Okay, so it depends on who the data, well, okay, so the date of birth is, it can be corrected from an interim 50058. You can do it at any time with just by doing a correction, non-financial. I forget what the option is, but yeah, you can make that correction at any time. And I don't know what the MI08 is.
Move
Oh,
in.
move in. Oh, okay. Well, it's whatever is easier. If you're moving someone in today and for some reason you put in the incorrect birth date, you can void that 5/8 and just start over, or you can just do an interim with the correction to the birth date. It's totally up to you. So if it was one that was submitted and you got an error, and so it was a new admission, and you got an error because of the date of birth, try to do it with the interim, with the correction. If the interim does not take, you can certainly void that 5/8 in PIC and start over.
So here's the weird thing about this one, just the specific, Catherine, sorry. The move-in was processed January 1 of 2020, and we have not seen an error until I just submitted August 6th.
And what were you trying to submit?
Just my regular submission for each month.
She said her name was, she's from Peninsula Housing Authority. Asking for you directly,
Yeah.
first and last name.
Okay, so yeah, try to do it with an interim correction and see if that works. If not, just reach out to me and let me know, and we'll try to figure out what's going on.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Yes. Yes.
I hope not, Rebecca.
That's pretty funny. Oh, gosh. Strange noises you hear on some of these calls.
How much time do we have left?
We're at 3:45, so we're right at time. But
We're
if you
right
have
at
more
time.
questions, you feel free to ask.
If I could just go back to PIC for just a second. How can we best use PIC to check our recertifications, make sure that we're up to date on the report?
Okay, so good question, and that's why I mentioned that reexamination report several times, because that's going to tell you which households, it's going to list all of your households that will need a reexamination, from the oldest, the ones that are most delinquent, up to the most current date. But yes, if you're looking at that re-exam report every month, it's going to tell you which households are due. The ones, like I say, that are 14 months or more past due are the ones that are counting against you on your delinquency report. But now remember, even if you process a new or a annual reexamination, it's not going to show up, depending on the time of the month, the timing. It won't show up until that next report. So the reports that are sitting out there right now are the reports for, what month are we in? September. They're sitting out there, they're August reports. So nothing's going to change on those monthly summarization reports. The re-exam, the delinquency, nothing changes until that new reporting cycle runs and those reports update. So you can make all the changes you want today, but they will not show up until those next reports come out.
Because I'm showing 3 people here, 2 of which I know that I've completed their recertifications.
Now, okay, so I'm going to ask you a test question.
Okay.
How would you know if you process those? What would you do to find out?
Well, in our software, I always wait until I've completed all the recertification process for that person, and then change the date. And I always place it at the first of the month, or if it affects their rent, I've got to give them 30 days so that I move it out to the next month. And I go back into our software. We have reports we can reprint from that software then,
Right.
Plus, you know, who's due for a re-exam.
Okay, so when you process that, so when you process your information in your software, are you uploading to PIC at that time?
I always wait until I do it at the end of the month.
Okay.
So when we turn the months at the end of every month, then I click a button and I transmit everything at the same time.
Okay. Okay. So once you do that, because like I say, that report's not going to change. You won't know for sure if those processed by the report until that next reporting cycle comes out. But you can go into PIC, into Viewer, and you can look that tenant up to see if that 5.8 processed. Because remember I said it's real time. So anytime you upload a 5.8, you can go into Viewer and look that tenant up by name or by social, and it will give you the most recent date for the 50058 that processed. And if it's the current date, then you know you're good.
Okay. I mean, we can do it on the fly, you know, every time we process, but I guess I just wait until the end of the month. So
well, yeah, there's a few that do that, and especially the smaller housing authorities, they will wait and do theirs at the same time. So as long as you have a method, and as long as you know, depending on when you process those, they may or may not show up on that report, until the next cycle. So the thing is to try to stay ahead of them getting past the 14 month.
yes.
Yep.